Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to my Finding My Way podcast. This is podcast number 33, titled Synchronicity times 3. Synchronicity times 3 is a story from my adult years. The collection of stories I have written and am reading to you cover many subcultures in our country that I have interacted with from childhood to my adult and senior years. A more extensive introduction to the Finding My Way stories takes place in the beginning of podcast 1. Regardless of which podcast you are listening to, you will find the story both entertaining and worthy of your reflective thoughts concerning its contents. The stories, as a collection, provide insights into a span of time that has played a role in shaping American culture and influencing its future. The stories provide you with a sense of admiration for the culture's collective courage and our country's commitment to justice and its optimistic willingness to address new challenges. Synchronicity times 3. Synchronicity 1. I remember that I couldn't get her out of my mind. It began while I was driving to work. I remember feeling that she wasn't very supportive when we worked together way back in 1969. This was 1992, so that was 23 years ago. Why would I be thinking of her now? It was my first job after leaving the Army in June 1969. I was to be the school psychologist serving several schools in Pinellas County, Florida. When I reported for work in the middle of August, they assigned the schools to me. 7 all-black inner-city schools being integrated for the first time in St. Petersburg, Florida. The first year of the integration plan was to have white school staff work in the all-black schools. I assumed some of the black professional educators were being sent to some of the all-white schools, but I didn't know it as a fact. The school system's plan for the second year of integration was to bus out some of the black students to the all-white schools and some of the white students to the formerly all-black schools. I didn't have a problem working with white or black people. My experience working with black soldiers during my 3 years in the Army enhanced my understanding of the sameness of all races. If anything, I thought the black Army officers I worked with were equal to, if not superior, to their white counterparts. The woman that I kept thinking about was an elementary school principal at one of the 5 elementary feeder schools to the 16th Street Junior High School I served, which was one of the 2 junior high schools that fit into Gibbs High School. There was no way I was going to remember her name. Everyone who knows me is well aware of the fact that I don't remember names very well. Remembering this elementary school principal would be about as impossible as remembering the name of her elementary school. There were 5 elementary schools, but I can only remember interactions with 2 other elementary school principals. The main reason I can recall the junior high school and high school names is that so many dramatic things happened at those schools. Also, 16th Street Junior High School had some truly outstanding guidance counselors. They were dedicated to helping children. All day long, I kept thinking about this woman. In my office at the Little Tennessee Valley Educational Cooperative, I was as busy as I could be. There were so many phone calls to make and to respond to that you would think my focus could not have handled even one distraction. Yet there it was. As I would hang up the phone, there she was in my mind. As I wrote another memo to be sent to the staff, there she was. Even as I reviewed possible grant applications for needed funding of one of the cooperative's programs, this principle popped into my mind. Okay, I had to think about her. Davis, that was her last name. It just came to me. It was just there. Sally Davis. This was remarkable. I could call her. No, that wouldn't work. There would be too many Sally Davises living in the St. Petersburg area. I don't have the time to try to track that down. Besides, what would I say? Anyway, she probably retired years ago. Why, she might even have died. She didn't really talk to me much. Oh, she wanted to know what I was doing with her teachers when they had a classroom behavior problem, particularly when I was going to videotape the classroom situation. But she never reviewed the tapes with me, or seemed to want to know how it all worked out. At least, she never asked me. However, she seemed to know what was going on. From time to time, I would notice her observing the classroom I was working in. She did want me to explain how I was going to improve or implement positive reinforcement strategies in general, but not for a specific situation. Now that I had 20 plus years of working with teachers, principals, and administrators, I had a little different perspective of Miss Davis. There was no doubt that she knew what I was doing in every classroom and with every strategy I was trying to implement to assist a troubled child. She may not have totally approved of those strategies, but she allowed me to implement them. She had to have been supporting me when some educators had objected to something I was doing. There are always those who object to any new strategy in education. They want everything to stay as it is. While as it is may not be working well, there is comfort in knowing that you know how to implement what is not working. It is frightening to have to try something that you're not sure you can learn how to do. Anyway, I could call Miss Davis and thank her for her quiet and gentle support of me in my efforts to assist her staff and students. Sure, that's what I could tell her if she were alive, and if I could find her. Maybe if I called St. Petersburg telephone information and asked for the number of Melrose Elementary School, I could find out how to reach her. Wait a minute. Where did I come up with that name? Melrose Elementary School. It just came into my head. I think that's the name of the school, but it may not be. I'm just not sure. Another hour of work passed before Miss Davis invaded my mind again. Well, it's 3 in the afternoon. The school secretary will be there. Oh, those elementary telephone lines are always busy this time of day. I'll never get through. There may not be a Melrose Elementary School in St. Petersburg. And if there is, they may never have heard of a Miss Sally Davis. At 3:15, I dialed information. They gave me the phone number for the school. Melrose Elementary School, may I help you? Yes. This is Jerry Morton. I'm calling for Miss Sally Davis, who may have been a principal at your school way back in 1969. I was a young school psychologist for the school then. Miss Davis isn't here. She left about a half hour ago for home. I can give you her home phone number. Sure, that would be fine. She gave me a school principal's home phone number. This is most unusual. School staff just don't do that. I was just a voice on the phone. This receptionist doesn't really know who I am. A principal's home phone number is a classified bit of information to the general public. Angry parents, strange people with even stranger points of view, can't have unlimited access to a principal's home phone number. This was highly unusual. What was going on? With a great deal of hesitancy, I dialed Miss Davis's home phone number. Hello? The slightly harassed voice at the other end of the line stated. Miss Sally Davis? Yes. This is Jerry Morton. I was your school psychologist back in 1969. Yes, I remember you. Now that was remarkable in itself, I thought. Miss Davis, you have been on my mind all day. I've been thinking about you and how quietly you supported me. I wanted to thank you. They put you up to this, didn't they? She stated in a matter-of-fact tone. No, I don't understand. No one put me up to calling. It's just that I have been constantly thinking about you all day. Why do you say that? Come on, they put you up to this. Miss Davis, it's just as I have said. I just wanted to call you and thank you for all you did to help me grow as a professional. That's all. Really? Are you sure? I'm positive. I just wanted to say thank you. Oh, that is so nice. Thank you. You see, the reason I thought they put you up to calling is that I left the school early to get dressed for my retirement banquet tonight. That is so wonderful. Congratulations. I truly did not know. I am so glad I called. I am too. Thank you. We said our goodbyes, and that was all there was to it. Synchronicity 2. For years I had wanted to spend the night on top of Mount LeConte in their camping facilities. It was the highlight of any area Smoky Mountain hiker's adventure. In my opinion, anyway. The problem was that you needed to make reservations far in advance, or their limited space at the highest point in the Smoky Mountains would be full. Some people had told me that you needed to make your reservations more than a year in advance. Food for the daily 3 meals was provided. The accommodations were reported to be somewhat primitive. The hike up the mountain was not easy. Many who started out hiking to the top decided to turn back before reaching their goal. I had only made it to the top of Mount LeConte on one occasion. Fortunately, on that occasion, I had been in acceptable shape to make the climb without overstraining myself, despite the fact that my 2 companions were highly regarded mountain climbers, both in the Smokies and elsewhere. My companions were also in a hurry. One of the women was hosting a dinner party later that Saturday afternoon. She wanted to get to the top and back to the parked cars in near record time. We made it. When my good friend called to say he had an extra ticket available for a guided hike and overnight stay at Mount LeConte the coming weekend, and wanted to know if I would like to go, I immediately said yes. This was a wonderful opportunity to fulfill my long-held goal. I would get to do it with an accomplished backpacker who had brought me into his annual fall backpacking group 20 years or so before. Those fall hiking trips were a true highlight of adventure, fun, and fellowship. The guide would be the director of a Smoky Mountain research project documenting the diverse plant and wildlife in the mountains. He and some of his staff members would take a group up to Mount LeConte. On the way up the mountainside, the guide would point out animal signs and unusual plants. We would have supper in the Mount LeConte dining hall, sleep overnight in one of their cabins, eat breakfast, and receive a picnic-type lunch for our hike down the mountain. John thought there would be about 10 people joining the hike. He was right. We all met at the designated parking area at the trailhead of the path we would be taking up the mountain. The appearance of various members of the group was a telling sign of their mountain experiences. Some of the participants had state-of-the-art packs ready to be mounted on their shoulders. The packs contained sipping tubes that were connected to hidden bottles of water inside them. Regardless of the quality of their packs, hiking sticks, or their sweat-wicking pants and shirts, the real measure of each participant's hiking skills resided in their footwear. Most of the group's footwear was adequate, with a few exceptions. One significantly overweight man was in regular shoes, the kind of leather shoes you would see worn in the shopping mall. Surely, I thought, he wouldn't be going on this hike. First of all, he was badly out of shape. I doubted he would be able to make it to the top. If he did, he would be far behind the group. The guide for the trip would have to assign a staff member just to hang back with this fellow in case he had a medical emergency. His wife was with him. Her footwear was not much better, but she appeared thin enough to make it up the mountain. Almost everyone making the hike was with a companion. There were some married couples, a few same-gender friends, such as John and I, as well as one middle-aged woman who was making the hike alone. The hike up the mountain was slow, with many stops taken by our guide to show uncommon plant life along the sides of the trail. He was very knowledgeable and an easy conversationalist. As the morning moved into afternoon, we stopped for lunch. Everyone had overpacked their individual lunches, which allowed for a lot of sharing. The sharing of food was the final icebreaker for all of the hikers to socialize. By the time we had reached the top of Mount LeConte, we had learned a great deal about each other. This was the second time the overweight man had climbed to the top. 3 days before, he and his wife had made the trip with our guide. He explained that he decided that he was going to lose the weight after his doctors made it clear that his life probably depended on it. The fact that he could have a heart attack climbing up the mountain this day was a risk he was willing to take. In my mind, I questioned that, but had to admire his grit. He had to be in great comfort going up the steep mountainside, but he did it. I just hoped I wouldn't have to help carry his body back down the mountain if he died. Once at the top of Mount LeConte, we were assigned to cabins. Our cabin had 2 large sleeping rooms and 1 bedroom with a single bed. The large common area of the cabin was open with benches around a table and a few chairs scattered about. Nice rocking chairs were on the porch. It was comforting to rock in them, overlooking the wide expanse of unending mountaintops below us. The large bedrooms were a surprise. The beds were primitive wooden structures with 2 levels that spread out close to the 3 walls they were not attached to. Thin mattresses covered them. They were unusually wide. Since 4 of us men were assigned to the room, it was obvious that there would be 2 people sleeping together at each level. A large wooden blanket spread over the mattress would need to be shared by the bed companions. The other big bedroom was for the 2 married couples, with the single bedroom going to the woman hiking without a partner. Supper was served in a large dining hall. All 10 long tables were full of hungry hikers. I ended up eating at a table full of hikers from other groups. They were from different states, with 2 guys from England. You just had to ask a few inquiring questions to stimulate interesting discussions. It seemed everyone had some interesting experiences and their hiking adventures to share. It provided a comfortable environment in which strangers quickly became friends. The food was basic country fare and good. After getting up before dawn the next morning to catch the morning sun rising above the mountain peaks, John and I decided that we would start back down the mountain after breakfast. We didn't feel rushed, but we didn't want to hang around just to eat lunch on top of the mountain. At the breakfast table, the woman staying in the single room in our cabin asked if she could join us in the trek down the mountain. That was fine. About mid-morning, we started down. We made good time. It's hard on your legs going down a steep mountain for hours at a time. While you don't sweat as much going down as you do going up the mountain, it's still a strain on your system. We took several rest stops. The woman began sharing her story with us. She stated that she was between jobs at the moment. As a high-level corporate executive, she was not going to take just anything that opened up for her. She wanted to work with a company that was doing something good for society, had a strong sense of ethics, and a pleasant work environment. The firm she was working for had been bought out by a larger one. She didn't like the corporate culture the new firm represented. So she accepted a mini golden parachute offer, which gave her a nice financial cushion while she searched for the perfect employment. Reflecting on her past, she wished that she could rejoin a firm she had worked for several years ago. What made that job so nice was the supervisor. He was such a considerate person. He always seemed to approach a problem in a calm, rational manner that was supportive to all the staff. With him, you just felt that the solution to the difficulty would be found, and everyone involved in finding it would be honored for his or her contribution. She was sorry she allowed herself to be lured away from that position. Maybe it was so that she could realize how important it was to have someone as competent and kind as that supervisor to work with. As the hike down the mountain approached the lowlands, the afternoon sunlight was partially blocked by the tree leaves. This brought a pleasant coolness to our perspiring skin, as well as a picturesque display of moving shadows and patches of sunlight on everything below the canopy of the trees. It was time to rest. We approached a beautiful stream of water beside a level stretch of trail. There were ferns near the edge of the creek and wonderfully green moss on both sides of the worn trail. A welcome log provided seating for one person, with rounded rocks nearby for others to sit on. It was definitely time to stop and rest. As the three of us approached this special spot in the Smokies, the woman concluded her account of wanting to work with the supervisor she had so admired. She finished by saying that she had tried to locate him but failed. He had left their former operation. The staff there did not know where he went from there. She tried calling all of the old phone numbers he had without success. It was as if he had just disappeared. She finished by quietly stating that she guessed she would never find him. With that, she simply sat down on the log and watched the water bubble over rocks in the stream. "Hey, what's this?" she said, as she started pulling something up from a large crack located on the back side of the log. Looking at a black, palm-sized book or pocket calendar, she held it up for John and me to see as she flipped through some pages and then declared, "It's a small Bible, the New Testament." John and I came closer to her as she looked at the first page. It had writing on it. "It's his! It's his!" she shouted. "It's my supervisor's. It's got his name and address and phone number right here," she excitedly exclaimed. "I know it's his new address. It's in the state his former firm thought he'd moved to. I can contact him. I know I can." She was so excited. The short walk from our resting station to the parked cars was filled with exclamations from the woman about the unbelievable coincidence of her find. At the cars, John and I gave her hearty hugs of goodbye and wished her success in contacting her former friend and supervisor. Synchronicity 3. "Don, it's great to see you. How are you doing?" I asked my old friend in this chance meeting. It had been years since we were able to communicate, although I had kept track of his activities since he left his Tennessee State Department position. We had both been highly involved in obtaining funds for services and providing services to children with disabilities over the years. "Well, how about you?" he replied with enthusiasm. "I've been writing and have started a podcast," came my quick reply. "Well, I've been writing too. As a matter of fact, I've got a book signing this Saturday morning at the coffee house in Maryville. Please stop by if you have a chance." "I'll make a point to do just that. We can get caught up on all of our life adventures then. Until Saturday." We waved goodbye and continued our separate journeys for the day. As promised, there was Don with his wife in the Maryville coffee shop the following Saturday morning. They had a book signing table set up on a small conference stage in the main section of the coffee shop. Don was selling one of the copies of his book to someone as we approached the signing table. When he finished the transaction and his conversation with the buyer, He turned to me and gave me a big hug, which I warmly returned. Don had been a true advocate for children. When he retired, he continued his work by starting a foundation that advocated for children's services in his area of expertise. I had continued working with the Educational Cooperative and the Internship Consortium for several years after his retirement. Our paths during those years did not bring us together often. However, we maintained a high degree of mutual respect for the commitment each of us had in obtaining quality services for children. Don explained the focus of his writings. They related his insights into his spiritual understanding of the world and the journey each of us has in expanding our own insights into our spirituality. So, tell me about your writings, Jerry. I bet they're about the many situations you found yourself in working at the co-op, Don stated. Well, actually, I really haven't written about my professional work and encounters during those developing years. I guess I need to get to that someday. I don't want to hurt anyone that I'd had conflict with during those times. There was a lot of conflict during those years. Implementing those new special education laws in the schools met with a lot of unexpected resistance. They were good people who just didn't understand. I don't want to hurt them or make them appear to be bad. They just didn't understand. But the law had to be followed. You remember those strategies all too well, I laughingly stated. Yes, we had to overcome a lot of resistance. It was a struggle for them and for us. There is one story from those early years I have been thinking about over the last few weeks. It happened around 1980. In fact, I've been kind of obsessed with thinking about it. This one school system we both know well asked me about a high school age student whose mother wanted him to leave the Tennessee School for the Blind in Nashville to attend the regular high school in the system. The high school he would naturally attend if he were not a disabled student. The school officials said he was really small in stature. The system didn't think it would be appropriate to allow him to attend one of their schools. I thought the law required them to serve the child unless they could prove otherwise. They didn't like my opinion. Oh, you need to tell that story. Well, I'm reluctant to do that. Since I tested the child, I'd need to get his permission. I can't risk violating his confidentiality. Was the child really short? Well, I guess you could say that. He was gifted, too. I'm pretty sure I know him. He's a friend of mine. I'm sure he would give you his permission. He graduated from college and did some graduate work towards a master's in psychology. Give me your email address and phone number. I will talk with him and get his permission for you to contact him. I'm certain he will want that story told. A few days later, Don gave me the man's phone number. I contacted him. He was the person I tested back then. We reviewed what happened when I tested him. He remembered my testing him and gave his permission for me to tell the story. I told him that I would have him review the account of my interaction with him and the educators involved from that time before I made the story public. He agreed to review it to ensure its accuracy. We had already realized that the background information the school system had given me was a little inaccurate as to the facts of his situation at that time. For example, I had the name of the high school wrong, but its location was accurate. He provided me with insights that I did not have at that time. Here is the story as I experienced it back then. The school system supervisor of special education and a more senior supervisor asked me to meet them in the system's central office. This was an unusual request. Most of the system's requests of the educational cooperative came solely from the supervisor of special education and were most often by phone. As supervisor of the cooperative school psychology services to the member school systems, I often found myself in stressful situations when it came to the services provided by the school psychologist and other special education service providers to the member school systems. The resistance to the new special education laws at that time was significant. The laws were making fundamental changes in how the school systems were providing education to all of their students, not just to the new services to children with verified disabilities, as defined by the law. Since I had been specifically trained in the law, was a doctoral level school psychologist, had created the school psychological services delivery model for the cooperative school systems, had trained all of the cooperative service providers in implementation issues of the law, was the supervisors of those service providers, was the executive director of the cooperative, and a due process hearing officer for the Tennessee Department of Education in adjudicating special education laws in cases between school systems and parents of special needs students. I often found myself advising the cooperative school systems to provide special education services that they did not particularly want to provide. In fact, several member school systems were so irritated with those recommendations that they were considering withdrawing from membership of the educational cooperative. The system that had just called had been in the process of internally debating the termination of its membership for several months. The principal of the high school the child in question would be attending was one of the leaders of the movement for his school system to cut all ties with the cooperative. The supervisor stated they had a mother of a blind dwarf who was insisting that her child return from the Tennessee School for the Blind in Nashville and attend regular high school. The mother said that her son complained that he already knew everything they were teaching the sophomores at the School for the Blind. He was bored. He wanted to come home and go to school at the high school he would normally attend. That was it. She was bringing him home and the high school would have to take him. They told her she would have to wait for them to work out the details. She said there was no need to wait. He was coming home. What did I think they should do? I knew the unquestionable reality of the state and federal special education laws was that the school system would have to evaluate the child to determine if he qualified as a special needs child that could not receive an appropriate education without educational assistance. The school system and this principal would not like my recommendations to them. I was correct. They were certain that a normal educational setting, a regular high school, was not the proper place for this child. I explained that if the mother wanted to bring a due process hearing against the school system for refusing to evaluate the child and to develop an appropriate educational plan for the child, they would lose the case. It was that simple. No matter what the system did to avoid evaluating the child and developing an educational plan to meet the child's needs, in the system the system would have to do it. Okay, the system agreed. They wanted one of the cooperative school psychologists or a school psychology doctoral intern at the cooperative to do an intellectual evaluation of the child. I was unsure that the cooperative had anyone who was trained to test a blind child's intellectual abilities. I asked them for a day's time to see if we had an appropriately trained professional to conduct the evaluation. The next day I met with the supervisors to report that the educational cooperative did not have a school psychologist who had been trained to conduct such an evaluation. Well, what should they do was the question. My suggestion was that I could do the verbal portion of an individual test as a screening measure to see how he scored on individual subtests in the verbal section, as well as to obtain a composite score in verbal IQ. Naturally, I could not administer the performance half of the intelligence test, as he could not see what he was to do on that section. That section required him to respond visually to the testing tasks. The results of the verbal testing might give the school system some clues as to the intellectual functioning of the child, providing guidance for developing strategies and how to proceed in this case. They agreed. The testing date was established. After I tested the child, I made my report to the school system. This blind child of very short stature, produced test results that found the child to have a verbal IQ in the highly gifted range as defined by the Tennessee Department of Education's rules and regulations for identifying gifted students. I explained to the school system that without the performance portion of the intelligence test being administered to a child, they could not use my results to declare the child intellectually gifted. However, it was clear to me that they would be in legal jeopardy if they did not seriously continue to determine placing the child in the high school as the mother had requested. They would have to continue their professional efforts to determine how the child's disability would interfere with the child's ability to receive a normal public school education and make the appropriate adjustments. I went on to report that during the testing process, the child was highly articulate and eager to please me. He was very courteous and pleasant to interact with. I thought he had the social skills to interact with other children and adults. The supervisors were not overly pleased with my results. The high school principal's body language indicated that he was agitated by my comments. The officials thanked me for the recommendations, indicating that they would handle the situation from then on. That was it. I was never informed as to what was decided about the child. I did not know if an individualized education plan had been developed for the child or if he had been allowed to attend his home high school. Several months after providing the school system with my oral and written report, I was attending a regional conference for school principals and supervisors. Walking into one small session group a little late, I was surprised to see the high school principal who was considering admitting the blind child into his school. He was commenting to the group about a blind dwarf child. He was such a delight to have in my school. I was so worried about his being in the school with all of the students. When classes would change and all of that rushing chaos, I was afraid he would be knocked down and hurt. We assigned a football player to be with him at all times during the out-of-classroom time to protect him. The boy was so appreciative of everything anyone did for him that everyone came to like him. The football players quickly adopted him. They let it be known that he was under their protection. Our school adopted him. We all looked out for him, students, teachers, staff, all of us. He was such an addition to our school. And the teacher said he knew all of the classroom material. He was up to date in every class. They agreed that he was gifted. The only problem that came up was that the boy sometimes became dehydrated towards the end of the day. He was too short to get a drink from the water fountains. He didn't want to cause anyone any kind of trouble or inconvenience, so he never asked for help getting up to the water spout for a drink. Well, as soon as we found out about that, I had the woodworking shop make steps for every water fountain in the school. We weren't going to let this continue. This boy is such a nice person. Admitting this child into our school was the best thing we could have done. That high school principal became one of the Educational Cooperative's strongest supporters. A few years later, he was elected to public office in his local county and appointed to become a member of the Educational Cooperative's Board of Directors.